OG Rose, and today we're going to be talking about visions and plans, on the importance of emphasizing vision first and then planning, for vision is more practical. This paper was inspired by my discussion with Andrew Luber, and it's a distinction that has come up a few times in OG Rose between visions and plans. And there's nothing wrong with planning. It's very important. And very often, I think when we get into the realm of thinking about difficult topics, we find that it's not so much an issue of right and wrong, although that of course applies to some degree. It just tends to be more obvious when you're dealing with right and wrong, what should be done. But when we get into really difficult things, we find often the problem is a matter of order and emphasis and structure. So what the paper is going to argue is that planning tends to be something we should do short term, maybe a month out or two, where visions should be our long-term strategy. But unfortunately, we tend to only discuss planning and have a long-term plan for what we should do. And ironically, this makes us unprepared for the future. Plans give us a sense of direction and organization, and without them, it would be impossible to coordinate with other people on what we should do, when we should meet, and the like. You really couldn't say get lunch with someone. You couldn't operate a business. You need plans for coordination. But there's also something dangerous about them in that we outsource our thinking to them and cease actively thinking once we have a plan. And in fact, there's a real sense in which we should cease actively thinking, because that would get in the way of the implementation of the plan. If you're still thinking, what should we do, what we should do once you create a plan, well, the plan probably will collapse and it won't go through. And so what we see here is that the whole virtue of planning is that there's a cessation of thinking, which allows collective action. This is similar to givens and belonging again. But of course, the problem with givens is that active thinking turns off. And so one could miss opportunity, one could get absorbed into, the banality of evil that Hannah Arendt talks about. So there's a risk here. At the same time, if we have vision, we have a vision of the future, we have a vision of what we could do, we have the ability to see opportunity in the unexpected and the unpredictable, but we're never able to make plans, well, then we're never going to be able to coordinate to realize those visions. So this is not an either or. Really, the main argument is that plans should be what we do in the short term, and we should always be simultaneously cultivating our ability to have vision in the immediate, because that is the best long-term strategy. To define the terms, a plan would be, say, what we all know a plan to be, where you coordinate time, place, variables, people, you make a plan. And that's what we all tend to do. Vision, which is different, is really something we should associate with improvisation, with the ability to see creatively out of what is to what could be, where we are openness, where we're dynamic, where we're able to take something that we didn't expect or we didn't predict and to incorporate it quickly into our life or to make value with it. This is what vision is. Vision, if one has vision, they can also plan. And of course, one who plans can also have vision, but there's something about outsourcing thinking to plans that I think can habituate us out of practices of cultivating vision. And this is where the problems start. In fact, since planning is socially understandable, a given plan, you can communicate it, you can talk to people about it, it can make sense socially, then it's easy for there to be a kind of social moralization of plans. But vision is very, in the moment, very live, very creative, very hard to explain. It's a high order causality, as the paper Experiencing Thinking talks about. And so it's not so readily socially acceptable. And so it tends to be socially deemed immoral in a way, or impractical or silly. And as a result, we don't tend to cultivate vision. And as a result, we tend to only have a long-term plan or plans for what we do with the future. But you see, it is extremely unlikely that a 30-year plan works out, simply because of all of the unexpected and unknowns that make up 30 years. It's also very unlikely a 20-year plan works out, although it's more likely than a 30-year plan. And 10-year, 5-year, 3-year, 2-year, 1 year, etc., etc. The longer the time horizon, the more unlikely the plan works out, unless the plan is very, very general. But if the plan is very, very general, it's probably not a very useful plan. So there's an issue in which the likelihood that a long-term plan works out is not very high. And it's kind of like the weather. The closer the forecast or the date of the forecast, the likelihood the forecast is correct. The forecast for tomorrow is more likely to be correct than the forecast from a week from now, from a month from now, and so on and so forth. This being the case, it is actually more practical, because it is more probable to prove useful, to cultivate vision, the ability to improvise with whatever arises, to work with whatever happens, to see what is in front of you and to make something of it, because then it doesn't matter what occurs. Now, of course, you can do both. There's nothing wrong with that, and in fact, maybe that's optimal. But if one has plans and not vision, it would probably be better off to have vision and not plans, and probably best to have a plan and vision, where you're able to improvise in the middle of the plan. And indeed, that seems to be optimal. The other problem with a plan is it tends to be very imposing. We tend to impose it upon life. We tend to force things to fit into it. It's kind of like an ideology. And arguably plans and worldviews and ideologies are very similar metastructures. If we have an idea of what we want the future to be, we tend to force the present to align with that future. And in some regards, that can be good because we're not faced with chaos. But at the same time, it also means we run the risk of closing ourselves off from possibilities we don't realize are there. And we don't see them. So, again, this is why it's important to have vision and planning. Vision is dynamic and open, and arguably that means it's true to life, because life is dynamic and open and complex. Whereas planning is very technical, like technological, very universal, very non-contingent. It seems to align more with Enlightenment AA thinking, and as you like readers of O.G. Rose likely know, we tend to be critical of AA thinking, not because it's wrong, but because it's incomplete when autonomous. And so likewise, planning, which seems very AA, is wrong and tends to cause pathologies and neuroses when we do it outside of vision. This is also critical to note because this difference between plan and vision. Because the moment I create a plan, I create a standard by which I can fail. I could be wrong. And that means I can be disappointed. And you see, if it's very probable that a long-term plan will not work out, simply because life is full of so many unknowns, then I've almost destined myself to fail and to be disappointed. I've almost just set myself up for failure. Like I can't win. Now, this is not always the case. But you see, with vision, the very ascribing to vision means we're aware that there's more to life than we can ever calculate, that there are unexpected things. And so if we have a plan and vision, if our plan doesn't work out, well, we're already kind of emotionally prepared for the plan not to work out. I mean, that's why we cultivate a vision, right? So the very act of ascribing to this distinction can help us avoid disheartenedness, failure, or feeling of failure. And in that way can help us continue striving. So vision also is good because we don't really fail in vision except in a failure to respond to the present, which arguably is kind of a fairer standard, right? I mean, because it's there, it's in front of you, it's what you are experiencing. And so also I think when you fail in regard to standards of vision, you also, a few things. One, it's kind of easier to understand why you failed and to not be so hard on yourself because the variables are right in front of you. Two, you immediately get another chance to redeem yourself because vision's always in the present, and if you fail in this moment, you can fail in the next. 3, you haven't invested, say, 20 to 30 years in the plan. This is the thing. Like when you have a big long-term plan and it fails, that's a huge investment that goes down the drain, and that can be very discouraging and make one go, why even try? Whereas if one has vision, one is always looking for ways to negate and sublate what they've done into what could be or new opportunities that arise. And the road, even if it's not straight like they thought it would be, the curves turn out to be part of the right destination, or a destination that is given to them by vision. So there's a lot of advantages to cultivating creative thinking, improvisation, the ability to respond to the immediate. And if we only invest in a strategy of planning, we really are, it's just very, very unlikely that we're going to succeed and not face failure. Vision is multiple, while planning is singular. And as we move toward our present moment, we must make a decision and plan according, so planning has a critical role. Again, I'm not saying planning is bad. What I am saying is that the best way to plan planning is with vision. The best plan for planning is to have vision. And yes, there is something that can sound passive about vision while planning is active, and I think that's one of the reasons why we can emphasize planning over vision. But in fact, cultivating the ability to respond to the immediate requires a whole lot of work. It requires a lot of cultivation of the self. It requires us to not just be consumers. It requires us to have the courage to stand against social moralizations. It requires us to have belief in ourselves, all of which is very existentially difficult. So, and the very fact that vision seems passive and is one of the reasons that it's not. That's why it requires a lot of challenge to cultivate, because we can be accused of passivity. So, vision, those without vision can truly suffer and can perish, I think, is a language from the Bible. And the hope of this work is by drawing a distinction between vision and plans, that one might see the benefits of cultivating both so that we might have a more beautiful, good, and true future. For more by OG Rose, please visit ogrose.com, Twitter, Anchor, Instagram, YouTube, and thank you so much for your time.